So how do agricultural practices affect the earth? And that's what we're going to be talking about in topic 5.4. So there's many different types of agricultural practices that are used in different areas throughout the world, depending on the crops and the climate, etc. And different types of agricultural practices have different levels of impact and different types of impacts. So we're going to just kind of talk about some of these impacts because they can be environmentally damaging. One concept is desertification. This is when land that was fertile, because of improper agricultural practices, can start to become vulnerable to turning into desert areas. And so what we see, these areas typically surround, the deserts that are present naturally due to climate, like we've talked about in the southwest of the U.S. or in Africa or Asia and Australia. But what we see is those are those red areas. Then what we see are these yellow areas. These yellow areas are surrounding these desert areas. But if they were improperly managed, if they are improperly managed, if we extract too much groundwater, if climate changes, then these areas could become desert as well, taking them out of the ability to grow crops to feed people. And so the degradation of these currently fertile lands into desert is called desertification. Tilling the soil. So you probably have seen this happening in our area if you've been out in the countryside a little bit in the early spring. Tilling is turning over the soil, using a plow to turn over the soil and plow it under. You could get a rototiller that you may have seen and used in your backyard garden. There's large-scale tillers that basically turn over the soil. A plow was a tool that was used to turn over the soil. And turning over the soil, what it does is basically it kills weeds by burying them under the surface and insects. It pushes crop residue below under the topsoil. But it has negative impacts as well. That exposed tilled soil can be vulnerable to soil erosion if it's dry and if water or wind conditions are at the right level. Then that could lead to soil erosion because that soil is exposed. It exposes the organic material that was in the soil to oxygen, and that organic material starts to decompose more quickly, releasing CO2 in the atmosphere. It also damages the structure of the soil, allowing for the soil to hold on to less carbon, so reducing the carbon sink impact of soils. And so those things can lead to negative impacts from this tilling of the soil. Slash and burn agriculture is a type of agriculture that's widely practiced in the tropics especially. Slash and burn agriculture basically is when people, corporations clear cut the vegetation, burn it to release some of those nutrients back into the soil, and then start to plant crops, graze cattle. A lot of this land that is lost, these ecosystems lost to slash and burn, are being converted into pasture land to raise cattle for beef. And this is common in the tropics, like I said, in rainforest areas. A big threat to the Amazon and other tropical rainforests is slash and burn agriculture. And again, after this process, after these trees are removed and burned, there's a higher likelihood of soil erosion because the roots of those trees are no longer anchoring that soil, and it's more exposed to the elements of water and wind as well. And usually the land that is put into agriculture from slash and burn, generally that land gets exhausted after just a few years because the crops deplete those those soils that are generally nutrient poor, and then a new area has to be found for agriculture. And so it sort of speeds up this process of deforestation in the tropical rainforest. Another example is the use of fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers were developed in the early 20th century. And what we see here, people have used fertilizer for since agriculture began, generally in the form of manure or guano or composted plant matter, have been used for fertilization. But when humans started to learn how to develop synthetic fertilizers in the 20th century, these synthetic fertilizers are inorganic. They're not organic fertilizers like decomposed animal manure or crop waste. They contain, generally three major nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. And the inorganic fertilizers that started to be developed in the 20th century, they use large amounts of fossil fuels, and they can use some chemical processes to capture nitrogen from the atmosphere. But it's very fossil fuel intensive. Also, these inorganic fertilizers are often more water soluble, and so they can run off into streams and watersheds more easily than the organic fertilizers like compost, animal manure. And so what we see here, this picture on the left shows composting taking place. Oftentimes, farmers can store their animal waste like cow dung and compost it over time, and then use that composted manure to fertilize their soils. This graph shows the production of different fertilizers. So the total fertilizer is this dark blue line. Obviously, it's drastically increased. We have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as well. And so these are those synthetic fertilizers that were first developed in the early, around the World War II. We can see that here. That's when these fertilizers took off.